In 1896, the neighbors laughed at Levon Avakian for building a stone tomb behind his cabin. But when the great blizzard of 1899 hit and temperatures dropped to -60, shattering log cabins like glass, they realized too late that he wasn't building a tomb, he was building a battery made of stone. Verkhoyansk District, Siberia, October 1894. While every settler in the frozen valley of the Yana River built heavy timber izbas like their fathers and grandfathers before them, Levon Bakins was hauling massive river stones up a permafrost ridge to build something the Siberian frontier had never seen. The 44-year-old Armenian stonemason spent 3 months constructing a beehive-shaped dome behind his cabin. A strange, windowless structure connected his home by a narrow, reinforced underground tunnel. The Armenian is building a tomb for himself, joked a fur trader at the local outpost. But Levon wasn't building a tomb. And if you want to find out what happened when the Great Siberian Black Blizzard of 1895 shattered every wooden cabin in the valley like dry kindling, read on. Levon Bakins had arrived in the Russian Empire's furthest reaches in the spring of 1888, fleeing the rising tides of violence and instability that had begun sweeping through Armenian villages in the Ottoman highlands. He had left behind a town near the shores of Lake Van where his family had been masters of stone for 11 generations. They had built churches that survived earthquakes, homes that outlasted empires, and, most importantly, the communal ovens that entire villages share for baking bread and heating water. Those communal ovens were called toners. They were beehive-shaped domes of stone, sunk partially into the earth with thick walls that absorbed the ferocity of morning fire and radiated it back for hours, even days. In the old country, Armenian families had gathered around toners for centuries, not just to bake the daily lavash, but to warm their bones, dry their winter woolens, and survive the mountain winters that swept down from the Caucasus with killing force. Siberia promised a different kind of safety, the safety of distance. What it delivered, however, was a landscape that reminded Levon painfully of home. High, desolate valleys, brutal winds, and settlers who built everything from wood, as if the larch and pine trees were the only materials God had provided for shelter. His first Siberian winter taught him what wood could not do. The log cabin he had initially rented near Yakutsk flexed and groaned through every gale. Gaps opened between the heavy logs as the extreme temperature swings expanded and contracted the timber. The single-wall construction of the Russian izba bled heat so fast that the masonry stove in the center of the room consumed wood faster than Levon could chop it. But it was the sound that haunted him most. On the coldest nights, when temperatures dropped below $-40 see dollar, the cabin popped and cracked like distant gunfire. Sap frozen inside the logs expanded with tremendous force, splitting with fibers with sharp reports that jolted him awake again and again. By morning, new cracks had appeared in logs that had seemed solid the night before. In Armenia, stone didn't crack. Stone didn't flex. Stone absorbed the sun's heat during the day and released it through the night, moderating the swings that would destroy lesser materials. The toners of his village had stood for 300 years. The wooden cabins of Timir rarely lasted 30, BY 1894. Levon had saved enough to claim a patch of rocky, unforgiving land near the Verkhoyansk range that no one else wanted. Too many stones to even dig a post hole, the local land-grant officer had sighed. Levon saw those stones differently. He saw thermal mass. He saw walls. He saw a toner large enough to heat a home and save his family from the purple death, the frostbite that claimed so many in the north. His plan was simple but unprecedented in the Siberian taiga. He would build a conventional log cabin for living. The locals expected log cabins, and as a foreigner, he needed to avoid attracting more suspicion than necessary. But behind that cabin, connected by a stone-lined underground tunnel, he would build a true Armenian heating dome. IT was to be a stone beehive, 12 feet in diameter with walls 3 feet thick, partially sunk in the hillside for additional insulation from the permafrost. Each morning, he would burn whatever fuel he could gather, scrub brush, peat, pine needles, and deadfall inside the dome. The stone would soak up that heat like a sponge. Warm air would flow through the tunnel into his cabin continuously for hours. The fire, the ash, and the smoke would stay outside his living space. The warmth would not. His wife, Miriam, supported him without fully understanding the scale. She'd grown up with toners in the old country, but had never seen one used as a furnace for an entire estate. Still, she trusted Levon's knowledge of stone in ways she could never trust the shrieking wood of Siberia. "The Russians will think you are a madman," she warned him. "The Russians think many things," Levon replied, sorting river stones by weight. "When the great cold comes, we will see who is truly mad." The dome's foundation drew attention before the first course of stone was even set. Levon had excavated a circular pit 4 feet deep, cutting into the frozen earth behind his cabin site. The hole was visible from the main sled track that connected the scattered homesteads. His nearest neighbor, a veteran fur trapper named Ivan Drago, who had survived 20 Siberian winters, rode over on a reindeer sled. He found Levon knee-deep in the pit. "Vacant. What in the name of the Tsar are you digging?" "A well? In this frost." Levon explained the dome, the tunnel, and the thermal mass. Ivan listened with the expression of a man humoring a lunatic. "You're building a stone igloo to heat a wooden house? This isn't the Caucasus, Armenian. We use iron and timber here. You're wasting a month of labor on a hole. You should be stacking cords of birch before the first snow." Levon merely smiled. "The dome will save more wood than I could ever cut in a lifetime." Ivan shook his head and departed. By evening, the story had spread to every settlement within 50 versts. The mockery was swift. At the local trading post, trappers gathered to laugh at the Armenian's oven. A man named Volkov declared the dome would collapse under its own weight the moment the earth shifted. A gold prospector named Jaeger insisted the tunnel would act as a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the cabin and suffocating the family in their sleep. Ivan reported that the foreigner planned to burn trash and needles instead of proper logs, as if a pile of forest floor could defeat a Siberian winter. The social pressure intensified. The local priest, Father Mikhail, visited the site while Levon was finishing the base. "My son, the people are whispered about. They say you are building a shrine to a foreign god, or perhaps a distillery for illicit spirits. The law of the North is simple. We live by the wood and the hearth. This stone hive, it is unnatural." Levon didn't stop his work. "Is it unnatural to want my children to sleep through the night without the sound of their walls exploding?" he asked. The priest left unsatisfied. By Sunday, the sermon at the small wooden chapel was about to send the Tower of Babel and the danger bringing foreign vanities to a land that demanded humble tradition. Levon and Miriam were not mentioned by name, but every eye in the room turned toward them. Undeterred, Levon continued laying stone. The dome's walls reached 5 feet by mid-September. He worked without mortar for the lower courses, dry stacking stones fitted so precisely that even the biting wind couldn't find a whistle hole. The corbelling began at the 6-foot mark. Each new ring of stones projected slightly inward from the ring below, gradually closing the circle until only a small 18-inch opening remained at the top. This was the eye of the dome, the chimney that would draw the smoke, while the 3-foot-thick walls drank the heat. His son, Tigran, served as his apprentice. Together they tested every stone. "Why so thick, Papa?" Tigran asked. "Each stone is a battery," Levon told him. "We charge it with a small fire in the morning, and it gives us the sun's warmth until the next dawn." The tunnel was a feat of engineering. Levon lined it with flat basalt and sloped it gently upward toward the cabin's foundation. Warm air naturally rises. The angle would ensure a constant, silent draft of heat. Inside the cabin, he installed a heavy wooden trapdoor over the tunnel vent. Opened the door, and the room filled with the scent of sun-warmed stone. Close it, and the heat was preserved. He spent a total of 11 weeks on the structure. His only cost was $4 for the iron hinges of the tunnel door. Everything else, the stone, the sand, the labor, was a gift from the earth. When Ivan Drago rode past in October to see the finished hive, he circled it twice. "It looks solid, I'll give you that. But stone is the color of death. It's cold. Everyone knows stone stays frozen longer than wood." Levon replied, "Cold stone is a corpse. Warm stone is a mother." The black blizzard of February 1895 began with a deceptive silence. For a week, The temperature hovered at a manageable $-20 circ C dollar. Then on February 10th, the sky turned a bruised, sickly violet, the sign of a high-pressure hammer coming down from the Arctic Circle. By noon, the temperature plummeted 40 degrees. By sunset, it had reached $-60 circ C dollar. This wasn't just cold. It was a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. The wind arrived at midnight, screaming at 80 kilometers per hour, carrying ice crystals that acted like sandpaper against the wooden cabins of the valley. At the Drago homestead, the first shot rang out at 3 a.m. A massive larch log in the center of the wall split with the force of a grenade. Within hours, the cabin was riddled with gaps. Ivan's family huddled in their heavy furs, their iron stove glowing red but failing to heat the air more than 5 feet away. Across the valley, the devastation was total. Volkov's cabin lost its entire roof when the corner joints, weakened by the contraction of the wood, simply snapped. He and his family had to flee to the cellar, where they burned their own dining table to stay alive. The gold prospector Jaeger was found weeks later, frozen in his bed. His stove had consumed all his wood, and the wind had prevented him from reaching his woodpile just 10 yards away. In the Verkhoyens district, the mortality rate that night was the highest in a generation. The wooden tradition of the North had failed. The materials simply could not withstand the physics of such an extreme thermal collapse. But at the Bacon's homestead, the night was different. Levon had fired the dome at dusk, feeding it a large armload of dried peat and pine branches. The stone walls, now charged with energy, radiated heat into the tunnel. Inside the cabin, the temperature remained a steady, comfortable $+15 circ C dollar. While the logs of their cabin popped and groaned under the external cold, the interior air remained calm and warm. Miriam baked bread on the floor near the vent, and the children slept in light tunics. They didn't hear the wind. They only felt the pulse of the stone. The tomb, the neighbors had joked about, had become the only sanctuary in the Valley Point 3 days after blizzard broke. A ghostly figure appeared at Levon's door. It was Ivan Drago. He wasn't riding a sled. He was walking, his reindeer having perished in the storm. His face was gray, his beard a mask of ice, and his fingers were wrapped in bloody rags where the frost had bitten through his gloves. Behind him, his wife and children followed like shadows. Their cabin was a ruin of split logs and snowdrifts. Levon stepped aside and ushered them in. Ivan stopped in the center of the room, his eyes wide with shock. The air wasn't stove hot. It didn't have that scorched, dry bite of an iron heater. It was a soft, enveloping warmth that seemed to come from the very marrow of the house. "How?" Ivan whispered, collapsing toward the warmth of the floor vent. Levon pointed toward the hillside where the stone dome stood, its top venting a tiny, triumphant wisp of steam into the frozen air. "The stone doesn't care about the wind, Ivan. It only knows how to hold what it is given." Ivan looked at his ruined hands and then at the Armenian who had been the butt of every joke for 6 months. "I called it Folly," Ivan said hoarsely. "I told the village you were a fool." Levon handed him a cup of warm tea. "In my country, we say, the fool builds with his hands, but the wise man builds with the memory of his grandfathers." That spring, the mockery ended. The survivors of the valley didn't go to the trading post to buy more timber. They went to the river to gather stones. Under Levon's guidance, 14 beehives were constructed before the next winter. The Armenian method became the standard for survival in the deep Siberian interior. The knowledge from a sun-drenched village near Lake Van had traveled thousands of miles to save the lives of those who had once laughed at it. Levon Bacon lived to be 90, and though his wooden cabin was eventually replaced by a larger house, the stone dome remained, standing silent and indestructible, a battery of heat against the heart of the great cold.